Hey everyone, I really know the pressure you guys must be facing. Not just you, anyone would be facing with a paper 1 economics question. Only two questions when their weight is 10 marks and 15 marks with no structure given whatsoever, and you have the pressure of even getting the entire marks or nothing at all. It's an all or nothing. So I'm here posting this video to help guide you on the structure of at least a few questions so that you get the hang of it. Okay, I lost that word. So this is a continuation of my previous video on the 10 marks question on merit goods. So this is the B part of that video. So if you are answering both of these questions following each other, you would use the definitions and graphs of merit goods from the A part and to just refer to A. So the key point in a paper 1 is to not waste time. Figure out what's needed and what's not needed. You need to write a lot, but you need to write it focused and not divert off topic. So that's the challenge really, and it comes with practice, and lots of practice. So here we go. Let's start with this question and figure out how we would solve it, and first how we would write the outline. So in the 15 marks question, there are certain keywords that are repeated a lot. So there are evaluate, which requires a judgment, and there's discussion, which requires discussion of different impacts or different points of view or different stakeholders being affected. In this case, he wants you to discuss policies. He wants you to discuss whether advertising by the government is the most appropriate way of increasing consumption of a merit good. So he wants you to identify the policies for the externality, solving for the externality of merit goods. So the keywords here are merit goods, government intervention, and in this case advertising as the way of government intervention. Okay. Now, the structure of a 15 marks question is slightly more deep than the one of the 10 marks question, as you need to show perspectives or points of view and evaluate in terms of certain criteria. In micro, the main criteria are talking about advantages and disadvantages, and in the context of the effect of different stakeholders. If there is a long-term, short-term effect, then this will definitely help the examiner see your understanding of the topic. Okay, so how do we structure the arguments of these criteria into the answer? So we start again like the 10 marks question, we start with our definition. So here is the outline of what you would do for the 15 marks question. You would start with the definitions of key terms. Second thing you would do is draw the graph for whatever the question is asking. In this case, we're going to be talking about advertising. Now, 10 marks question, in 15 marks question, sorry, you tend to draw two graphs. You tend to compare two things or state two effects. Or in this case, even though it's not mentioned, you are going to state two policies of the government and compare their advantages and disadvantages. So the one policy we know we're going to use is the advertising, and the other one we're going to be using is the subsidy. Since this is a merit good, then the alternative policies are advertising, subsidizing, legislation, or direct provision by the government. So the most detailed one in terms of analysis are advertising and subsidies. So when we draw a graph, we explain the graph in A, B, C, D, and we state the advantages and disadvantages on the different stakeholders and if there is a long-term and short-term effect. So this is our first graph on advertising, and the second graph we're going to do is on subsidies. So again, the ABCD, advantages and disadvantages of a subsidy on the different stakeholders and if there is a long-term and short-term effect. And finally, we evaluate. So you give your own judgment on the policies. Remember to answer the question. So he's asking you discuss whether it is the most appropriate way. So in your answer at the end, you should give an indication of your opinion on, is it the most appropriate, least appropriate, it's appropriate to a certain extent. So this is based on how you justify your answer. Okay. Now let's start. And before we start, let me draw you a picture. Since this is a merit good that was unhealthy food, I'm going to draw an apple because in exams I tend to get bored. As a student, I always draw on exam papers, and I think it's healthy to do what makes you feel comfortable in approaching the question. And here's the highlighted part of the apple. Okay, this is a really bad apple, so I'm just going to cross it out. Now, let me start. Again, don't waste time in defining things that you already did in the A section. So this is what I'm going to do in terms of definition. As defined. Okay, so let me outline what exactly is the definition that I'm going to be tackling. So again, merit goods. When you talk about merit goods, then you also define externalities. And finally, advertising and government policies. So I'm going to be defining advertising and subsidy at one point or another. It doesn't have to be all defined at the beginning. The graph of advertising will be more or less something, it has to be shown on an externality graph. So it's the same externality graph, MSB and MPB, and the one that shifts as a result of advertising is MPB, and this will be clearer when we draw the graph itself. So this is just an outline. The graph of a subsidy, on the other hand, shifts the supply curve. So MSC, MSB, MPB, and it's the subsidy, it's the supply curve that shifts when the subsidy is given to producers. So, and this will shift the quantity. So this is an outline of the graph. And this is the outline of my apple. Now let's start. As defined in A, again, we waste time with definitions and graphs I mentioned before. Merit goods create market failure and causes the good to be under consumed in the market. One way, and just go right ahead in answering the question. Don't reintroduce merit goods. I've seen this a lot of times. Don't reintroduce merit goods. Don't re-explain the graph of externality. Just go ahead and say, and go into advertise. One way the government can intervene to solve for this market failure. As I'm retyping this, I'm noticing how I'm repetitive in my words, and again, this comes with practice. You learn how to be less repetitive with practice. Advertise the consumption. And I did my own view on the definition of advertising, since it's not really an economic term. Advertising will promote the good to the public through using the media. Go right ahead and draw the graph. Don't waste time talking and then drawing the graph and then talking again. Just go right ahead into the analysis. So again, big graphs using a ruler. This is the worst graph I've ever drawn. Even in my whiteboard class, I have more straight lines than this. This is the supply curve, MSC, and we have the externalities represented by the difference between MSB and MPB. Again, I've seen this mistake. The externality is the vertical distance between MSB and MPB. The externality is not the consumption or the quantity difference, it's the difference between the two curves. So the vertical distance is the externality. Now let me just finish the graph itself. So this represents Q star, this represents the quantity that's consumed in the market, and what advertising intends to do is increase the demand of the consumers, increasing their preference and taste for that good, shifting their private consumer demand, and getting the quantity of the market to be closer to the socially optimum. So this is going to label it as Q1, and the arrow shows the shift between before the advertising and after the advertising. Label the axis. This is something that may be forgetful amongst all of the mess of the question, but don't forget to do it. Label the diagram itself, because you are going to refer to it, especially when you're going to be drawing more than one diagram. Figure 1 is market for healthy foods after or with ads. With advertising. You don't need to do it. This is the market for healthy food. Okay. Now let's start the explanation of the ABCD of the graph. Figure 1 represents the demand and supply. Represent the demand and supply for the market for healthy food. Link it to your example. Yay! As explained in A, because healthy food is a merit good, quantity consumed in the market is Q, which is lower than the social optimal Q star. Advertising will increase the demand for first. Okay, so what's the ABCD of advertising? First, it changes the taste and preference of the consumers. Second, it causes the shift in the demand, NPB to NPB1. C, it causes the quantity demanded in the market to rise to Q1 and the price of the good in the market. We can identify the price now from P to P1. I tend to identify the prices of what consumers pay. It's really complicated to explain it's unnecessary to explain the price in terms of socially optimal, so I don't tend to do that. So advertising will increase the demand, causing the demand curve, it will increase the taste and preference, causing the demand curve to shift, causing increase in quantity and increase in the market price, and lowering the welfare loss from the externality. Okay, as the quantity gets closer to the socially optimal. So advertising will increase the taste. This is basically what I'm writing now. Taste and preference of consumers towards healthy food, causing the demand of consumers to shift from NPB to NPB1, as their quantity demanded increases at every possible price. So this is just an explanation of what shift is. As their quantity demanded increases at every possible price. So it state also to shift to the right. State the direction of the shift. Okay, this increases quantity demanded in the market from Q to Q1, which is closer to the social optimal quantity. Q star. Now, let's explain the effect of this on in terms of advantages and disadvantages in the market. So, advantages: society benefits from this policy as more of the good is consumed, resulting in a decrease in the welfare loss to society from the area. And you can identify the area of the welfare loss before the advertising and after the advertising. So if I go up, before the advertising, the area of the welfare loss was from here until the point of the social, so A, B, C. And now it became Q1, so it became a much smaller welfare loss, A, D, E. From the area ABC to triangle ADE. Okay, so what is the benefit? So state the benefits on the different stakeholders. Who are the different stakeholders? Consumers, producers, society, and government. We already said the effect on society, so let's start from the consumers. Consumers get to consume a bigger quantity, but paying a higher price, P1 instead of P. So this is the advantage to consumers, and at the same time it's a disadvantage. Second thing, producers get to sell more in the market and for a higher price, so their revenue increases. The biggest cost is on the government. Also give a hint of your priorities. Don't just mention facts. Mention that this cost is the biggest. So even though consumers get to pay a higher cost in terms of a higher price, but the biggest cost of this policy is ultimately on the government, which has to pay for the cost of advertising. This cost may have been spent in alternative government spending, such as on public goods or other markets. Or other markets representing an opportunity cost to the government. Finally, advertising may take a long time to be effective and change people's behavior, so the effectiveness of the advertising itself is not guaranteed. Also, advertising may not be effective in the short run and may take a long time to affect people's behavior. So this is our analysis of advertising. Now we then go to subsidies. Before going to subsidies, let's summarize what are the advantages and disadvantages of a subsidy. Try to have this outline before. Again, the more you practice, you may need smaller outlines every time you practice. So, advantages of subsidies to the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Let me write them on the side. Consumers, producers, government, society. Let's start with society. Advantage to society is quantity is closer to Q star. Less welfare loss to society. What else is the advantage? Yeah, let me have more space. So this is the advantage to society. To consumers, they spend less, the price gets cheaper, and also let me say the price is lower, and the quantity they buy is higher. Good. What is the advantage to producers? So this is consumers. Remember, this is an outline. You may not understand anything from it. This is everyone writes the outline in his own way. What's the advantage to producer? They make higher revenue. They get to receive a higher price and sell a higher quantity. So it's very good to producers. And the cost of the subsidy is again on the government cost. And what is the main disadvantage of a subsidy is that it may be hard to sustain over the long run. So it may be limited to the short run and may not be as efficient to sustain over the long run, limited to short run. The advantage is that it has an immediate effect. So unlike the advertisement, which may not be effective, the subsidy has immediate effect on the market since it lowers the price immediately. Okay, and the evaluation at the end is to state based on all this. So let us jump right into subsidies. As you notice, the time in the first question should be around 30 minutes, and it is getting tight. Another policy, so I'm going to move a little bit faster. The government could implement is to subsidize healthy food. Define subsidy. Don't forget it. You can define at any point in the evaluation. A subsidy is a government payment to producers which lowers the cost of production. So go right ahead, let's draw it and explain further what's the effect of a subsidy. Let me get this down a little bit. Okay, so cool, this is the eraser. Where's the pen? There it is. Oh, let me go a little bit downwards, good. And extend this hard graph line. I hate doing that. Never, ever do what I just did. Just erase, draw with a pencil, please. This would be avoided if you drew with a pencil and would not if you drew with a pen. Don't forget labels, because those silly marks if you forget writing the quantity and price. If you even have the time and the mood, write quantity in full words and price and identify this is the quantity of what. Okay, again, graph, externality, don't forget it. We are applying a subsidy to the externality graph. So we have marginal social cost, marginal social benefit, marginal private benefit. Since this is a positive externality of consumption, remember our example is on merit good, which is in this case subsidy on healthy food. This is the quantity Q star, socially optimal. This is the quantity, since these are the private consumers, so this is the quantity that's privately consumed, that's actually being consumed. Because the government wants to make the Q closer to Q star, it implements a subsidy which lowers the cost of production, making the supply curve shift downwards, and we have marginal social cost minus subsidies. Subsidy lowers the cost of production. Now, where is the new quantity consumed? It's this. Do we identify any other point in the intersection? Is there a new social optimal quantity? No, 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 no. There is no socially optimal quantity here. Please do not draw that. I've seen it. I was shocked. The socially optimal quantity does not change. It's the market quantity that shifts closer. So do not mark any other points in terms of quantity. Again, the quantity gets closer towards the socially optimum, so it shifts from Q to Q1. And the welfare loss is represented first by triangle ABC. Remember, it points towards the socially optimal, which in this case is A, and is now going to be diminished to triangle ADE. Certain different people can draw the subsidy in different ways. Sometimes the shift of the subsidy causes the quantity to shift exactly to Q star. Sometimes it can shift a little bit more than Q star, and they're all perfectly correct answers, and they all demonstrate the parts of the advantages and disadvantages of a subsidy, one of which I did not mention in the outline above. The disadvantage of a subsidy is that it may be hard to estimate. So there's a risk of over-subsidizing the good. And we're going to write this in our evaluation, which, oops, we don't have time for this. Time is running out. Where's my... Okay, let's start. Time is running out, and this is exactly what I would face as a student in the exam. Tension, tension, tension. Figure 2, a subsidy will lower the cost of production, causing the supply curve MSC to shift downwards from MSC to MSC minus sub, and we could have written this as minus subsidy. Okay, this causes the amount consumed and produced in the market to increase to Q1, or to increase from Q to Q1. And what is the effect on the prices? Where is the price before? This was the price before. P, the price after, becomes P1 to consumers, but it's, if we go upwards, a lot of lines, P2 to producers. Remember, in subsidies and taxes, the prices that consumers pay is not the same as what producers receive, is not the same as what consumers pay. So, let's start with the advantages and disadvantages along our explanation of the graph. Society is better off as the quantity is closer to the social optimum. Lowering the welfare loss from triangle ABC to ADE. Okay, what's the benefit to consumers? Consumers benefit as they now pay a lower price P1 to buy and buy a higher quantity. Producers benefit. Oh my god, 30 minutes have passed. I've wasted too much time at the beginning, and this is something I need to work on in the future. Producers benefit as they now receive a higher price P2 instead of P, and are selling a higher quantity. Thus making a bigger revenue. Okay, and this is the importance of the outlines, that I can just go back and check was there anything else I added in the, well, this is really badly written outline. So did I add anything in the consumers, producers, society? I mentioned all of these, so I can just go ahead and talk about the disadvantages. Okay. However, the subsidy represents a government burden, as the government now has to pay subsidy amount of, and this is where you demonstrate to the examiner your real understanding of the theory, that the subsidy amount is represented by the triangle, which is the vertical distance of the subsidy at the quantity consumed. So the quantity consumed is Q1. The vertical distance represents the subsidy, so I'm going to label this point F, and this is labeled as E. So let me just rewrite it as E. So this point of, oh, let me really try something out. A la Welker style. Let me put in my pens toolbar so that I can change the color. And so, where is my pen? There it is. Over here, A, E, the vertical distance subsidy, horizontal distance of the quantity, the amount of the subsidy times the quantity that is sold. This is the government payment. So it's represented of, so the government has to pay a subsidy amount of area P2, P1, F, E. Okay, let me zoom in because I feel I'm too far zoomed in. Oh, oops, and this is too much in. Okay, this is good. Now again, this represents a cost to the government, and so this represents an opportunity cost to the government, as explained before. It is also a burden for the government to sustain such cost over a long period of time. And many developing countries, this is something extra that you can add to show your understanding of the whole curriculum. Many developed countries may not be able to afford such a policy. benefit, however, is that the subsidy has an immediate effect on the market. This is a balanced argument to win. So you're showing to the examiner that you know both perspectives, both advantages and disadvantages. And finally, it may be hard, may be difficult to estimate the exact amount of the subsidy needed. Amount of the subsidy needed. So there's a risk the good may be over-subsidized. So there's a risk government may over-subsidize the good. And we're way overdue in time. So let's wrap this up. In conclusion, it's very important to answer the question. The most important way of increasing consumption of a merit good. In conclusion, the most appropriate. In conclusion, the most appropriate policy a government may need to apply is a combination of both advertising and subsidy. You're summarizing the key points that you've outlined in your graph analysis as the subsidy, which is effective in the short term, may be hard to sustain over a long period of time. And the advertising may take time, may be needed to affect people's long-term behavior and lower the dependence on the subsidy. And we're at it. We are done. Let us review quickly. Oh my God, 38 minutes. This is way too much. We're going to have to work on that. Let's review. What did we do? Discuss. We did a discussion on the advantages and disadvantages on the policies. We discussed 2 different policies. Don't go further than that. Go in deeply in 2 policies. Much better than just mentioning 3 or 4 policies, each with a paragraph. Okay? Very important. Go in depth. Now, refer to A in definitions and anything that was explained before. Do not re-explain it. Oops, there's it. So all definitions were mentioned. Some of them were mentioned as in advertising in the beginning. Some just like subsidy was mentioned in the middle. Graphs, 1 graph for advertising, 1 graph for advertising, and another graph for subsidy. After each graph, we did a explanation in ABCD of the graph, what shifted, what increased, what decreased, and within the ABCD we started mentioning the impact on consumers, producers, government, and society. Remember, stakeholders, these are always the same stakeholders in almost all of the questions. So make sure you mention the effect on each and every one. And then we went to the different policies. So we mentioned the effect on them, advantage and disadvantage, and who carries the burden, and what's the long-term, short-term effect. Same thing in subsidy, we did that. A, B, C, D, and we concluded by answering the question as the most appropriate. Use the words that were used in the question. The most appropriate policy the government may need to apply. And here, the most important. What is the most appropriate way? When he tells you in another question to what extent, then you answer in the conclusion to a large or to a small extent. And we need to wrap this up. 40 minutes. We need to work on the timing, and that's great. Now let me draw you another apple before we go. Oops. Yep. And that's time. It's a red apple representing the healthy food, and I'm going to go. Okay.